Hello everyone, my name is Nicole Arey. I'll be talking to you today about the Woodcock-Johnson 4 Test of Achievement. The abbreviation for this test is WJIV. The authors of the test are Frank Scherank, Nancy Mather, and Kevin McGrew. The Woodcock-Johnson 4 is a test that is published by the Riverside Publishing Company. The copyright for this version, the fourth version of the test, is 2014. There are other versions. This is the most recent. This test has 20 subtest categories. They're listed on the right-hand side in the visual that I've attached to the slide. The first 6 tests are the core tests. Those are the tests that if you wanted just a general test of achievement, those are the core tests that you'd really focus on. They are organized in a very specific way so that they alternate between different tasks and achievement areas. For example, you can see test 5 is a calculation test, followed by test 6, that's a writing samples test. This gives the students a break from each of the academic sections in case there's one that they prefer or maybe is not a preferred section. The tests, though, depending on what child you are examining, can be administered in any order that the examiner sees fit. So maybe you have a student that prefers to take all of the math portions at the same time, or maybe all of the writing samples at one time. This test is also very, you're able to take the tests over any amount of time. You can take the tests all at once during one day. You could take the test over a number of days. This test is available to students across a large range in ages. So the younger students may need to have the test broken up over a series of days, completing one test at a time. Older students may be able to sit for an hour and a half and take all of the tests at once. You're also able to add on any of the other tests that you maybe are interested in looking for achievement in. So this is a very large testing test. So it's kind of unique from some of the other tests you may find. The Woodcock-Johnson 4 has 20 test areas, as I had previously mentioned. Each of the 3 visual pictures that I've included on this slide depict each of those areas on the test. The first slide on the left, on the upper left, has the written language portion of the test. These are all the subtests for written language. The middle section has the reading subtests, and then on the upper right you can see all of the math subtests. There are quite a few of them. You can read through some of the examples that are included. Also, I have included the website for the Woodcock-Johnson webpage. It's kind of a long website, so you may be better off just Googling it, but that is included there in case you are interested in purchasing this software for your school or for other testing purposes. The normative summary is included on this page. The national norm sample is shown on the left-hand side. For this norm sample, there were 7,416 participants. You can read through the ages listed, but this norm sample ranges from ages 2 through 90 plus years old and grades kindergarten through 18. This is a huge sampling of people, so this test really is available for a variety of ages and for a variety of uses. This information was compiled from 46 states in the District of Columbia. So it has a great sample of people from all different regions of the U.S., which helps with things like cultural or other kinds of things that may influence test scores. The sample that is listed on the left-hand side is from 1999. It is not the most recent national norm sample for the Woodcock-Johnson. There was another norming study that was conducted over a 25-month period, began in December of 2009 and ended in January of 2012. That information was all compiled and put out in a 2014 norming study. That information was included in the technical version of the Woodcock-Johnson manual. However, this norm sample from 1999 was a little easier to see and understand, but there is some more recent information on the norming sample and a bigger participant pool. The reliability for the Woodcock-Johnson 4 test is varied depending on the test that's taken. There are 3 charts included on this slide that show the age ranges at the top. The very first slide has ages 7 through 11. The second slide has ages 14 through 17. And the third slide is ages 26 through 79. These were the ages that were focused on for the reliability piece. In the technical manual that I read, the age 11 had the lowest rate of reliability. That was the age group where there were the fewest amount of participants in the norm study that they did. And the greatest age group and the greatest reliability area were ages 50 through 59. In that age group, there were the most amount of participants. And another reason the reliability for that age group is a lot higher is that from ages 50 to 59, there's not a lot of difference in knowledge and skill set. At age 11, 11-year-olds that are 11 year 1 month from an 11-year-old and 11 months, there's a big difference in the availability of knowledge in that area. So there's a big difference for reliability for somebody that was to retest at another point in time. On each of these portions of the test that I've included, there are the scores. It says the R12 score. It's in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th column from where it says test. That is the reliability score. So as we learned in class, the closer to 1 that score is, the more reliable the test is. So it looks like if we were to skim through, I see some 0.76 in the sentence writing fluency in the 14 through 17-year-old age. That appears to be the lowest reliability score. To me, that would just show that the sentence writing fluency would be a low reliability because of the individual examiner's ability to score that test and score it the same across all testing atmospheres. So that one is kind of a given. That's a harder test to calculate than maybe, say, a math test. So if you look at that same age group, the age 14 through 17, the math fact fluency has a really high rating of 0.97, which is really close to 1. So the reliability for that test is a lot higher, and that would simply be because in math facts, you either have the answer right or wrong. There's no in between, no gray area. But based on the ages and the test that's given, the reliability will vary. So that is something to look at for each individual test. The manual has stated that the reliability refers to the precision of a test score. So the high reliability indicates that an individual's measure on a test would be unlikely to change if he or she were retested under similar conditions. Reliability is a necessary but not sufficient condition for validity. While high reliability does not necessarily imply that a test score is valid for a specific purpose, reliability is an important element of the overall validity argument for a test. So to figure out if a test is valid, the reliability is one big component of that. However, it's not the only portion of the test that affects the validity. So we'll move on to validity in the next score, but just for this, just look at the R12 scores, and you can see that even the lowest score for the sentence writing fluency of 0.76 is not super low. That is kind of low compared to the other scores, but it appears to be a pretty reliable test where people could give this test under the same conditions and receive a score that would unlikely change if you were retested, time after time. Moving on to validity. Validity is the most important consideration in test development, evaluation, and interpretation. Throughout the development and the design of the Woodcock-Johnson 4, the research team conducted a variety of studies over the validity of the Woodcock-Johnson 4. There is a standard for the validity testing. The standards for educational and psychological testing is a series of steps that are outlined, and Woodcock-Johnson test team were very careful to follow the steps as carefully as they could. They made special effort in providing a variety of testing for validity. The Woodcock-Johnson research team conducted 15 concurrent validity studies, testing individual tests and cluster tests on the Woodcock-Johnson 4 test of achievement. They tested a group of people over a series of days, weeks, months, taking the same tests over and over and seeing how those scores compared day in and day out to themselves, as well as how those test scores compared to similar tests that are comparable to the Woodcock-Johnson 4. And with all of those tests, they were able to see how the Woodcock-Johnson 4's test and the interpretation of the scores compared to the interpretations from a variety of examiners in the Woodcock-Johnson 4 examination and testing, as well as how those scores were related to the other tests that were used to compare. In my subjective opinion, the validity and reliability of the Woodcock-Johnson is very high. This is a test that, anybody that's worked with IEPs has certainly heard of the Woodcock-Johnson test. It is a high standard of testing. A lot of people use this as the one test that you use to write your IEP goals, the test that you go to see how students in your class compare by ages or by grades or whatever you're comparing them on, and just to see personal growth over the year or the 3 years whenever you do your annual or triannual testing. So I would say, based on what I've seen personally with this test, as well as what I have researched over the past few weeks with this assignment, I would say that this is a really valid test, and it should be one that everyone can use and feel really comfortable using, and knowing that the results will not vary. The results are going to be pretty much the same throughout time, and you can rest assured that this test is going to get you the answers that you are looking for. The scores are what you are looking for when you're administering any test, really, but the Woodcock-Johnson 4 is a test that gives you a bunch of different kinds of scores. So the raw scores are the scores that the student is getting or the individual is getting on the specific test. So typically it's 1 point awarded for a correct answer and no points awarded for an incorrect answer. So those are your raw scores. The raw scores translate to a standard score, and the standard scores then put you in a percentile ranking. You can also receive grade norms or age norms depending on what kind of information you're looking for from this test. Generally, the grade norms are preferable for school-based decisions. So if you're looking at the grade level to differentiate work for an individual student, or if you're looking at a grade level to write an IEP goal to align with Common Core standards, those are the grade norms that you'll be looking for. If you are a clinician and you're working in a clinical setting, you would be more apt to look at the age norms, looking at the ability from the age point of view of the student. So those are some of the different types of scores you can get from this test. I also have included the visual in the middle of the screen showing the standard score. If we were to look at the third line down, say a student scored between a 111 to a 120, that student or individual would fall into the 76th through the 91st percentile rank. That means that individual will have done as well or better than 76 to 91 people out of 100, which would classify them, according to the Woodcock-Johnson 4 classification, as a high average individual. So this information, as I mentioned, can be used in a variety of ways. Most of us as educators are looking at, especially in the special education field, looking at how this information can help you to teach or catch up a student in a specific area of academics. So that's kind of the scoring in a nutshell. So as we know, for any standardized testing, there are certain modifications and accommodations that are allowed and those that are not allowed. According to the Woodcock-Johnson 4 technical manual, these are the modifications and accommodations that are allowed without compromising the validity or the reliability of the test. These are accommodations that will have no impact on the test scores, so they are available to students and for the examiner to give to the individual examinee. So starting with the setting, this test is a test that is a one-to-one testing. So the examiner can take the examinee into a private location. The examinee has the ability to use earbuds or headphones for sound blocking. Earbuds kind of would be more along the lines of earplugs, not headphones. So blocking sound, or if there's some kind of special lighting that the examinee would prefer, that's something that is able to be accommodated for. Special acoustics, so if loud noises are an issue or or whatever kinds of acoustical issues there may be. That's something you can work with. Another big thing I know in special education is the adaptive seating or furniture. Maybe your student prefers to work on a bouncy ball, like a yoga ball sort of thing, or maybe your student prefers to recline a seat or sit on the floor or whatever. This test is administered on the computer, so there would be some kinds of accommodations for seating or furniture that may not be able to be accommodated. But the setting is a pretty flexible thing for this test, as long as the student is doing the work and getting the information into the computer. It kind of seems like this setting is something that is very easy to work with. The timing of this test, they do use the Basel and the ceiling rules, which focus the assessment on the examinee's level of ability and minimizes testing time. Frequent breaks can be used in between tests if needed. So say you have a student, maybe you have a student that isn't able to sit still for a long period of time. The student wants to take the 15-minute writing test, takes the 15-minute writing test, and then goes outside for an active break, gets out some energy, so they're able to sit down and they're able to do the next test. So as long as they're taking breaks in between the tests, that's not a big deal at all. Any of the tests in the Woodcock-Johnson 4 that are not time tests have the availability to extend time. There are a few tests that are timed. Those tests are very strict to their time limit. That's a standardized testing procedure that is across the board. If you were to extend a time on a test, if it was a 15-minute test and you extended the time, you then would be invalidating that test. So do not extend time on time tests. However, any test that is not timed, they are able to have as much time as they like. The presentation of the materials, the examiner is orally presenting all of the information, all of the instructions to the examinee. The language of the instructions is a sufficiently simple level of linguistics complexity. This is something, so we're not using super academic language that might be difficult for, say, a 2-year-old to use or understand. So they have included a lot of visuals, large print. There are few items on a page, increased space between items to allow for better focus. Audio presentation is available on some tests. That is individualized depending on which test you're doing. That information is included on the individual subtests accommodations area. And as an examiner, you have the ability to allow visual magnification devices as well as templates that reduce glare on the computer screens. They can be incorporated. Those are given to the examiner before they are administering these tests. So once you've gone through the proper training, you will know exactly which sorts of things you can use for the presentation. Scheduling is another one of those. This is a one-to-one testing. So scheduling is something you can easily do to accommodate the examinee. If there's a specific time of the day, maybe you have a student that works best in the mornings or one that works best in the afternoon, you can schedule testing for those specific times. The individual that maybe cannot sustain peak performance over a long period of time, for me, I think of the younger students or the students that maybe have ADD, ADHD, the students that aren't able to sit and take a test for an hour and a half straight. Those students are able to take the test, maybe one test a day over a 2-week period of time. or maybe 2 tests one day, skip a day, do another 2 tests. So the scheduling portion is a portion of this testing group that is easily modified and can be individualized to the specific needs of the learner. English language learners, or ELLs, are students or individuals whose native language is not English. English is their second language or possibly their third language. We need to accommodate our testing for these English language learners. There are a series of protocols for people that are testing people who have English as a second language. First of all, the examiner must be familiar with the second language acquisition process, native language attrition, language shift and dominance, cross-linguistics transfer of learning, and the impact of special language programming and socioeconomic factors on language learning. So unless you are proficient in the second language, maybe you have lived in another country or something, maybe that is a native language to you, you cannot administer this test unless you are proficient in that language. I mean, as you could guess, there are a lot of reasons why that would be true. There are things such as cultural factors, such as beliefs and values, aspirations, learning styles, lifestyles, morals, and attitudes that differ greatly across different languages and different areas in the world. The example that our professor used with the person that was from a warm climate area that lived in Maine and saw white stuff on the roof and couldn't figure out what it was, that's a perfect example of something that I might not understand about somebody else that lives in another area. So you really need to be really fluent in the language if you're going to be assisting a student or a learner in testing in another language. There are a few different Woodcock-Johnson tests in other languages. So if at all possible, if the language is, Spanish or French or one of the more common native languages that we may find in the US, chances are Woodcock-Johnson has a test in that native language. That is the preferred method for testing. You'd still want to have somebody to administer the test that is familiar with the native language. It's obviously hard to give directions and instructions to somebody if you don't know how to speak the language. So really, if you don't know the language, don't give them the assessment, don't give them the test. Find somebody that can. There are many people that are around, interpreters or other things that may be able to help you. So just be careful. If English is not a first language, find someone that can help you get around that barrier, and make sure you're doing it according to the protocols for the actual test. So there's a huge section on this in the technical manual for the Woodcock-Johnson 4 test. If you come across this, find that section, read about it, and figure out what you need to do. So by now you're probably wondering, how much does it cost? The Woodcock-Johnson, I was actually surprised, is not really that expensive. There are 5 different packages that you're able to purchase. The cost for the Woodcock-Johnson testing supplies vary between $85 and $165, depending on which options you choose. For me, I would just want to go all the way in and choose the $165 option. You get the reports, the scoring materials, the resource materials, additional materials for ages 2 through 19. Sounds like a good deal. I would just go for the larger option, especially if you're using it at a school where you're going to be using this information for years. Well, at least until they come out with a new version. So I was actually pleasantly surprised to see that it was as cheap as it is. Who can give a Woodcock-Johnson 4 test? Here are some of the examiner qualifications. This is a test that people may have a variety of different professional titles, roles, or responsibility depending on which state they live in or which area they live in. So there is not a specific, you do not have to have, say, a master's degree with a certain qualification. They do look for people that have graduate level training in educational assessments and background in diagnostic decision making. So we want people administering this test that have the training on assessments and standardized testing and are able to interpret the data in a way that is consistent across the board. So you'd like people that have had some sort of training. I know in Maine there are a lot of certifications or licensing or trainings that people can go to become an examiner for a specific test. So unless you have the testing qualifications, you are not able to administer this test. So I am not qualified at this moment to administer this test. This is actually a goal that I have, is to become an examiner. It's something I would really enjoy. So as of yet, I do not have the qualifications for this, but down the road, it's something I would really be looking at obtaining. After reading through the testing manual and speaking with the examiner at the school that I work at, I had found out that there are a number of different test times depending on the subtest that you're taking. If you were to take all of the tests at once, the examiner at my school had mentioned that it takes about an hour and a half to take all of the tests. The core tests, which are tests 1 through 6, take approximately 40 minutes. And then there's a writing samples test, test 6, that requires about 15 to 20 minutes to take. And then each of the other subtests are approximately 5 to 10 minutes apiece. So the time frame is maybe a little more time than you might typically see on a test, but this incorporates a lot of subtests, so the hour and a half total test time I don't think is a huge amount of time, especially where we know from the accommodations and modifications area that you are able to split up the times, you're able to schedule at a time that's convenient for the individual learner. Given all of that information, I think that's a very doable time frame. As far as the scoring for these tests, a lot of these tests are done on the computer. The scores are relatively easy to score online. I even saw that there is an app. There's an app for everything now. There's a Woodcock and Johnson app for your phone, so you can score information on the go, which I'm not sure about the confidentiality portion of that, but it might be something, maybe you have an iPad and you want to bring it to an IEP meeting to pull up the scores and pull up, the norm referencing information for grade level or age level. So you can pull it right up on your app, and you can show the parents or show the team or whatever you're looking to do. So as far as the scoring, I think that this is probably a pretty easy test to score. I have not actually seen the scoring portion myself, but I believe where it's on the computer, it's probably all almost done automatically for you. So I think that portion would be pretty easy. For my objective review of the Woodcock-Johnson 4 test, I looked at the piece written by Sean Locke from University of Windsor, titled, "Can the Woodcock-Johnson Diagnose ADHD?" This review was written in 2011. This is an interesting piece for me because I had not heard this, but I guess when I did some research, that the Woodcock-Johnson is one of the tools that some people had used to diagnose ADHD. So Sean Locke looked at the ability of the Woodcock-Johnson to diagnose ADHD and how this test had gained popularity for the ability to diagnose ADHD. After many trials and testing of many kids that have ADHD, kids that do not have ADHD, comparing other sources that test for ADHD or other tests that are similar to the Woodcock-Johnson. It's pretty interesting to see that Sean Locke found that there was a mild support for Woodcock-Johnson to diagnose ADHD. I think it's also, actually, I don't know if I mentioned this, important to say that this was for the Woodcock-Johnson 3. I'd assume, other than adding some more tests and more subtests and doing some more testing for the validity, the Woodcock-Johnson 3 and the Woodcock-Johnson 4 are probably pretty similar. Just like anything, it's the upgraded version. But I think it is interesting to look at how Woodcock-Johnson, even in their testing and technical manual, had made a claim that their product is a proven tool to diagnose or help to diagnose ADHD. So it's interesting to look at this study and to see from an unbiased party at how, there's really not a huge correlation to this test and the ability to diagnose things, diagnose ADHD or potentially other things or disabilities that people may have. So I thought this was an interesting study to look at. I did not look to see if in the Woodcock-Johnson 4, if they still have this listed as a diagnosis tool. It would be interesting to check that out and see if maybe there have been some changes that have come from Sean Locke's investigation in this matter. But I think that the biggest take-home piece from this article is to say that you can't always trust what you read, even in these tests that have, months and months of validity testing and reliability testing, and they have multi-page manuals and technical manuals and, all of these things. You can't always take what's written on the pages as a definitive source of information. So I'm also wondering how many people have used this as a tool to diagnose ADHD, and how many of those diagnoses are maybe not 100% correct. So I just thought this was interesting. I would be interested to hear what anyone else has for input on this information. So I look forward to hearing what some of you have to say.